The dust of a sweltering Arizona noon coated everything. The faces of men haggling over cattle, the worn planks of the auction house porch, and the quiet despair of the human lot for sale. Jedediah Jed Thorne, a man whose face was as weathered and lonely as the expanse of his ranch, stood apart from the crowd. He wasn't here for livestock, he was here for a wife. His ranch, a harsh but beautiful patch of land named Dusty Creek, was a monument to his solitude. Years had passed since his last conversation that wasn't with his horse or the distant echo of a coyote's howl. The isolation was a physical ache, a dull throb in his chest. He needed a partner, a companion, not just a wife in name. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice and a cruel glint in his eye, gestured toward a covered wagon. "Next lot! Lot number 3! A mail-order bride, folks. From the city she is. A bit shy, you see." The crowd snickered. Jed's jaw tightened. They were treating a human being like a piece of meat. A young woman was led out, her slight frame hidden under a thick, dark hood that cast her face in deep shadow. She moved with a tremor, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. "Let's start the bidding at $10, the auctioneer bellowed. A few low bids came in, fueled by a morbid curiosity and lechery. Jed waited. He watched the way her shoulders shook, the way she seemed to shrink under the harsh sunlight and the leering eyes. $50! A rough-looking man with a stained shirt called out. $55! Another man followed. Jed stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dusty ground, his voice low and clear, cutting through the noise. $100! A hush fell over the crowd. 100 was a small fortune. The auctioneer's eyes widened, then narrowed in a smirk. $100! Going once, going twice, sold to the rancher with the big pockets and the even bigger heart. Jed ignored the jab. He walked toward the woman, his large frame a shield against the leering crowd. He reached for her, and she flinched, a small, panicked sound escaping her lips. "It's all right," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm Jed. You're coming with me." He paid the money and led her away, her hand small and cold in his. As they reached his wagon, the woman stumbled. He caught her, his calloused hands steadying her. She looked up, and for a brief moment the hood shifted, revealing the corner of her mouth. He saw a flash of a beautiful, genuine smile, a mix of relief and something he couldn't name. It was gone as quickly as it came, but it was enough. The sight of it made him gasp, a silent internal gasp of hope he hadn't known he still possessed. He helped her into the wagon, and they began the long, quiet journey back to Dusty Creek. The first few hours of the journey were silent. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves on the hard-packed earth. Jed kept his eyes on the trail, but his mind was on the woman beside him. He still didn't know her name. Finally, he broke the silence. "My name's Jedediah. Folks call me Jed." She didn't respond. He glanced at her. She was huddled in the corner of the seat, her head down, the hood still concealing her face. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice soft. A long pause, then a whisper barely audible over the wind. "Ilara, Ilara," he repeated, testing the name. It felt strange on his tongue, a name too delicate for his rough world. "It's a beautiful name." Another long silence. He didn't push her. He understood that some wounds needed time to heal. As the sun began to set, they stopped to make camp. Jed built a small fire and prepared some coffee and stew. He offered a plate to Ilara, and she took it with a shaky hand. She pulled the hood back just enough to eat, but he still couldn't see her face. He noticed the way she held her arm, a stiffness that wasn't natural. "You're hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, but her hand went to her left arm. "Let me see," he said, gently but firmly. She hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, pulled back the sleeve of her coarse dress. His heart sank. Her forearm was a tapestry of purplish bruises and thin, angry-looking welts, as if she had been struck repeatedly with a whip. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice now a low growl. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, then quickly looked away. My uncle. He didn't need to ask for more details. The story was etched in her skin. A desperate young woman, probably forced to become a mail-order bride to escape a life of abuse. The world could be a cruel place. He took out a clean bandage and a small jar of salve from his satchel. "I have some salve, it'll help." He gently applied the balm to her wounds. His touch was careful, his large hands surprisingly light. Ilara flinched at first, but then she relaxed, watching him. He saw the shift in her demeanor, the fear slowly being replaced by a fragile trust. "It's just us here," he said, looking her in the eyes. "You're safe now, I promise." Ilara's eyes, a deep shade of brown, looked into his. He saw the flicker of a question, a plea for a promise to be kept. He held her gaze, letting his sincerity show. This was a different kind of promise than any he had ever made. This was a promise to a stranger, a promise to protect and care for her, and he would keep it. The morning sun at Dusty Creek was a sight to behold, painting the landscape in hues of orange and gold. Jed woke before dawn, as was his custom. He made coffee and bacon, the aroma a pleasant welcome to the new day. He walked to the small bunkhouse, a separate building from the main cabin, where he had settled Ilara the night before. He knocked gently. "Ilara, breakfast is ready." A moment later, the door creaked open. She stood there, the hood finally gone, her face pale but beautiful. Her hair, the color of molasses, was tied back in a simple braid. The bruise on her cheek, a dark, unsightly mark, stood in stark contrast to her otherwise soft features. He saw the fear in her eyes, the expectation of cruelty. He hated the man who had put that look there. I can help," she said, her voice still quiet. "You can eat," he replied with a slight smile. "There's no hurry. The ranch isn't going anywhere." She followed him to the main cabin, a simple structure built of wood and stone. Inside, it was Spartan but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a few pieces of sturdy, handmade furniture were all that filled the space. They ate in silence, a comfortable, companionable silence that was a novelty to Jed. He watched as she ate slowly, her gaze wandering around the room, taking in every detail. She seemed to be searching for something, a sign of danger, a hidden threat. "This is a good place," she said quietly, her eyes coming back to his. "It's home," he replied. "I built it myself." He saw her glance at the shotgun leaning against the fireplace. "Is it safe?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "Safer than most places," he assured her. "We don't get many visitors out here. It's just me and you and the land." After breakfast, he showed her around the property, the stables, the well, the small vegetable patch he tried to cultivate. She was a keen observer, her eyes taking in everything. He showed her the horses, and she reached out a hesitant hand to pet his mare, a gentle animal named Belle. Jed noticed a small, hopeful smile on her face as she stroked the horse's nose. It was the same radiant smile he had glimpsed at the auction, but this time he saw it fully. It transformed her face, making her look younger, less burdened. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in a very long time. He realized then that he wasn't just offering her shelter. He was offering her a chance to heal, a chance to be herself. And in doing so, he was beginning to heal himself. The profound loneliness that had been his constant companion for years was starting to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Days bled into a week, and a quiet rhythm settled over Dusty Creek. Ilara's presence was a balm to Jed's solitary existence. She didn't talk much, but her actions spoke volumes. She took over the cooking, her simple stews and breads a vast improvement over his own meager fare. She tended to the small garden, her touch bringing new life to the struggling plants. One afternoon, Jed found her sitting on the porch, mending a tear in his old work shirt. The sight of her, so focused and purposeful, filled him with a quiet satisfaction. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice soft. She looked up, her needle poised. It needs to be done. Besides, it's good to have something to do. He sat beside her, the wooden bench groaning under his weight. Tell me about the city. You said you came from there. She hesitated, her gaze distant. It's loud. There are so many people, but you still feel alone. It's a different kind of lonely than here. I understand that, he said, looking out over the vast, empty landscape. Out here, the silence can be a comfort. It gives you room to breathe. She smiled, a fleeting but genuine expression. Yes, it does. Jed felt the space between them shrink. He wasn't just a rancher who had bought a bride. He was a man getting to know a woman, and a woman who was slowly, tentatively, beginning to trust him. He learned small things about her. She loved the smell of rain on dry earth. She was afraid of thunder. She had a soft spot for stray animals. He also learned about her past, not through direct questions, but through small, painful revelations. Her parents had died of sickness, leaving her in the care of her abusive uncle. She had escaped, barely, and the only path forward had been the grim reality of a mail-order bride. I thought it would be better than what I was leaving behind, she confessed one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so scared when I saw you. You looked so big. Jed chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. I am big, but I hope you know now that I wouldn't hurt you. She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a new kind of light. I know, she said, and her words were a promise. He saw the bruises on her arm fading, slowly. The physical wounds were healing, but the scars on her heart were deeper. He knew that the hardest part of their journey together was not the physical distance they had traveled, but the emotional one. He had to earn her trust every single day. The storm hit without warning. The sky, which had been a clear, brilliant blue, turned a bruised purple. The wind howled, a savage beast tearing at the windows and rattling the cabin's foundation. Jed had been outside, mending a fence, and rushed inside, just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Ilara was already inside, her body curled on the floor near the hearth, her hands over her ears. She was shaking, her face pale. Ilara! Jed's voice was filled with concern. What's wrong? She didn't answer. She only shook her head, a silent, frantic gesture. He knelt beside her, his large frame a comforting presence. It's just a storm, he said, his voice gentle. It'll pass. She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. No, you don't understand, she whispered, the words choked with fear. He used to beat me when it rained. He said the thunder was the sound of my disobedience. A cold fury settled in Jed's stomach. The man who had hurt her, the uncle, was not just a memory, but a living ghost that still haunted her. Jed took her hands in his grip firm, but not tight. Look at me, Ilara, he said. She lifted her head, her gaze meeting his. I am Jed. I am here, this is my home, and no one will ever hurt you here. The thunder, it's just the sky letting go. It has nothing to do with you. He pulled her into a hug, a simple protective gesture. She stiffened at first, her body rigid with fear, but then, slowly, she relaxed, her head resting against his chest. He could feel her ragged breathing begin to even out, the tremor in her body subsiding. They stayed like that for a long time, the sounds of the storm raging outside, and the quiet comfort of their shared presence inside. The rain lashed against the windows. The thunder boomed, but Ilara no longer flinched. She was listening to the steady beat of Jed's heart, a rhythm of safety and peace. When the storm finally passed, the air was clean and fresh. The world outside was washed and new. Ilara looked at Jed, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. You saved me. Jed shook his head. We're just taking care of each other, he said, and for the first time, he truly believed it. He was not just her rescuer. She was his solace, a quiet harbor in a lonely world. The peace at Dusty Creek was shattered by the arrival of two men. They rode up to the cabin late one afternoon, their horses looking ragged and their faces covered in a fine layer of dust. One was a tall, lanky man with a cruel smirk. The other was shorter, with a nervous energy that made him fidget constantly. Jed stepped out of the cabin, his hand resting casually on the revolver holstered at his hip. Ilara stayed inside, peeking through the curtain. "How can I help you?" Jed asked, his voice low and cautious. "Jedediah Thorne, isn't it?" the tall man said. "Heard you bought yourself a bride. We're just checking in on things. Name's Cole. This here is my brother, Billy." Jed's gaze hardened. He knew what kind of men they were. They were bounty hunters or something worse, scavengers who preyed on the desperate. "She's not for sale," Jed said, his voice flat. "Get off my land." Cole's smirk widened. "We didn't say she was for sale. We just want to talk to her. Heard she ran away from her family. There's a nice reward for her return." Jed felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Her uncle must have put out a bounty, a last desperate act of control. "She's my wife now. She's staying here," Jed said, his hand tightening on the hilt of his revolver. Now. Let's not be hasty," Billy said, his voice whiny. "The old man wants her back. He's willing to pay good money. We're just the messengers." Jed shook his head. "The message has been received. Now leave." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just buy a person and keep them? That girl has a price on her head, and we'll collect it one way or another." The tension was a palpable thing, a live wire stretched between them. Jed knew he couldn't let them get to Ilara. He couldn't let her go back to that life of fear and abuse. He had promised her she was safe, and he would die before he broke that promise. "I suggest you ride out of here before you find out what a mistake you've made," Jed said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Cole and Billy hesitated, a look of surprise on their faces. They had expected an easy mark, a lonely rancher who would crumble under pressure. They hadn't expected a man who would stand his ground, a man whose quiet resolve was more threatening than any empty threat. "We'll be back," Cole sneered, turning his horse. "The old man is desperate. He'll send more." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a sense of unease. Jed watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew they would return, and next time it wouldn't be a simple confrontation. It would be a fight. He walked back into the cabin, his face grim. Ilara was standing in the middle of the room, her body shaking, her eyes filled with the same terror he had seen during the storm. She had heard every word. "You can go, Ilara," Jed said, the words heavy and difficult. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "They'll keep coming back," he said, gesturing to the window. "They won't stop. Your uncle, he wants you back, and he won't give up easily. I can't put you in danger like this." The words were a lie. He didn't want her to go. The thought of her leaving, of her walking out of his life and back into that world of fear, was a physical pain. But he couldn't be selfish. He had to think of her safety. "I won't go," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "Ilara, you don't understand. These men, they won't stop at anything. They'll burn this place down. They'll hurt people. Me, you." "I know," she said, walking toward him, her hands reaching for his. "But this is my home now. You are my family. I won't let them take me from here." He looked at her, at the raw courage in her eyes, at the woman who had transformed from a scared, hooded stranger into a person of steel and resolve. He saw the genuine care in her gaze, the unspoken promise of a shared future, of a home built on more than just a piece of land. "I'm not leaving you," she said again, her hands tightening around his. "You promised me I was safe here, and I am. Because of you, now let me help you protect our home." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Our home. The simple phrase carried a weight he hadn't expected. It was no longer just his lonely ranch, it was theirs. He looked into her eyes, and he saw a reflection of himself. He saw a lonely person who had found a reason to fight, a reason to live, a reason to build a future. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice calm and determined. Jed sighed a long, weary exhalation. He had been so focused on protecting her, he hadn't even considered the possibility of fighting together. But now, the idea felt right. He wasn't alone anymore. "We get ready," he said, a new resolve in his voice. "We fortify the cabin. We set a watch. We don't let them get the jump on us." Ilara nodded. "Good," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "I'm not a fighter, Jed, but I can make sure you're fed. I can watch your back. We're in this together." He saw it then, the powerful shift in their relationship. It was no longer about a purchase, a transaction, or a rescue. It was about a partnership, a bond forged in mutual trust and a shared fight for survival. Jed spent the next few days preparing. He reinforced the shutters on the windows, sharpened his hunting knife, and cleaned his rifle. He taught Ilara how to load the shotgun, her hands fumbling at first, but then growing more confident with each movement. "It's heavy," she said, her arms shaking as she held it. "It is," Jed replied, "but it's a good kind of heavy, the kind that keeps you safe." The storm, when it came, was not of wind and rain, but of dust and malice. Cole and Billy returned, this time with 3 other men. They rode hard, a posse of grim-faced desperados, their intentions clear. Jed and Ilara watched them from the window. Jed's heart pounded in his chest, a drum of nervous energy. Ilara's hand was a comforting, steady presence on his arm. "They're here," she whispered. "I know," he said. The men dismounted, their guns drawn. Cole approached the cabin, his cruel smirk back in place. "Thorne, we know you're in there. Give us the girl and no one gets hurt." Jed didn't respond. He had a plan. A risky plan. "I'm not giving her up," Jed yelled, his voice echoing across the silent landscape. "Get off my land, I'm warning you." Cole laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "We're past warnings, rancher. We'll be taking what's ours, and we'll enjoy doing it." A shot rang out, a bullet splintering the wood of the doorframe. The siege had begun. Jed and Ilara moved from window to window, their movements a well-rehearsed dance of 2 people who trusted each other implicitly. Jed fired a warning shot, aiming for the dirt near Cole's feet. The men scattered, taking cover behind rocks and bushes. The standoff lasted for hours. The sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows. Shots were exchanged. Bullets whizzed past the windows, embedding themselves in the thick wooden walls. Jed was a sharpshooter, his aim true and deadly. He wasn't trying to kill them, just to scare them off, to make them realize this wasn't an easy fight. But the men were persistent. They wanted the bounty, and they weren't leaving without it. Ilara was a rock. She loaded the shotgun, her hands steady, her fear replaced by a fierce determination. She watched his back, her eyes scanning the landscape, a silent sentinel. She was not just a burden to protect, she was an ally, a partner in the truest sense of the word. At one point, as Jed reloaded his rifle, a shot grazed his arm. He hissed in pain, his focus breaking for a moment. "Jed!" Ilara cried, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," he said, his voice strained. "Just a flesh wound." He saw the fear return to her eyes, the worry for him replacing her own terror. He knew then that she wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for his. He was no longer just a protector to her. He was a person she cared for, a man she was willing to fight for. The moon, a pale sliver in the dark sky, was the only witness to the final confrontation. The men, frustrated and tired, decided to rush the cabin. Cole and Billy, a twin wave of hate, led the charge, their guns blazing. Jed braced himself. He had only 2 shots left in his rifle. Ilara stood behind him, the shotgun a heavy presence in her hands. "Ready," he whispered. "Ready," she whispered back. As the men broke from cover, Jed fired. His first shot hit Cole in the leg, sending him sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. The second shot hit the ground near another man, forcing him to duck for cover. Only Billy and 1 other man were left. They were close now, just a few yards from the cabin door. Jed had to make a choice. He had to defend their home, to defend their future. "Jed!" Ilara's voice was a sharp command. He looked at her. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes held a steady resolve. She was holding the shotgun, her stance firm. "Ilara, no," he said. "I'm not a fighter, Jed," she repeated, her voice clearer now. "But I will protect what's ours." She raised the shotgun, her arms shaking from the weight, but her aim steady. She fired. The blast was deafening in the still night air. It hit the man beside Billy, a blast of buckshot to his chest that sent him flying back, his gun clattering to the ground. Billy, stunned and alone, looked from his fallen companion to Ilara, then to Jed. He saw the fire in Ilara's eyes, the fierce determination of a woman who had been pushed to her limit. He saw the cold, murderous look on Jed's face, the promise of a swift and final end. He dropped his gun, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm out! I'm out!" Jed walked forward, his own gun now trained on Billy. He tied his hands with a length of rope. Then he went to Cole, who was still on the ground, groaning in pain. He tied him up as well. The other two men, seeing their leaders captured, surrendered without a fight. The battle was over. The silence that followed was a welcome balm. Jed looked at Ilara, who was still holding the shotgun, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the fight. He walked over and gently took the gun from her hands. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. She looked at him, and then at the scene of the conflict, the defeated men on the ground. A single triumphant tear rolled down her cheek. "We did it," she corrected. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. The morning sun, a symbol of a new beginning, rose over Dusty Creek. Jed had tied up the men and left them near the road, along with a note for the sheriff and their guns, so he could prove they had been a menace. The land, once again, was quiet. Jed and Ilara sat on the porch, a pot of coffee between them. The air was crisp and clean, and the smell of rain-washed dust was a welcome scent. "What will you do now?" Ilara asked, looking out at the vast, peaceful landscape. Jed shrugged. "What I've always done. Tend to the ranch, except now it's different." He looked at her face, no longer pale with fear, but radiant with a newfound strength. He saw her smile, the same one he had glimpsed at the auction, but this time it was a smile of pure, unadulterated happiness. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" he asked, the question of vulnerability he hadn't shown before. She reached for his hand, her touch soft and warm. "No, Jed, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." He looked out over the land, over the horses grazing peacefully, over the small cabin that had become a fortress, a symbol of their shared resilience. He had come to the auction to buy a wife, a companion to fill the void of his loneliness. But what he had found was so much more. He had found a partner, a friend, a love so profound it had given him a reason to fight, a reason to live, a reason to believe in the future. The lonely rancher was no longer lonely. The silent bride had found her voice, and together, in the harsh, unforgiving world of the West, they had built a home, a life and a love story forged in the crucible of conflict and bound by the unbreakable ties of trust and courage.